Clara shivered, though the air in the mine shaft was thick and heavy, tasting of damp earth and something metallic that made her stomach churn. It wasn't the cold that gripped her, but fear. Tonight she was to be married. Not to Jeb, the cowboy whose smile made her heart flutter like a trapped bird, but to Silas, the miner. Silas, with his eyes that glittered like fool's gold and his hands that were rough and calloused from years of digging in the dark. The lantern hanging from a rusty nail cast long, dancing shadows on the damp rock walls. They seemed to mock her, whispering promises of escape that she knew were impossible. Silas had made sure of that. He'd locked her in here, a bridal chamber of stone and shadows, until the wedding. He said it was to keep her safe, away from prying eyes and wandering thoughts, but Clara knew the truth. It was to break her spirit. She ran her fingers over the rough-hewn timbers that supported the tunnel, feeling the give and groan of the ancient wood. The mine was old, riddled with weaknesses, a rabbit warren of twisting passages that could collapse at any moment. A shudder ran through her. The thought of being buried alive was almost as terrifying as the thought of marrying Silas. She remembered Jeb. Jeb, with his easy grin and his strong arms, the way he'd look at her like she was the only star in the night sky. They met at the town dance, a stolen moment of laughter and whispered secrets under the watchful eyes of the chaperones. Their love was forbidden, a spark of rebellion against the rigid rules of the town. Her father owed Silas a great debt, a gambling debt he couldn't repay. Silas had offered a solution, Clara's hand in marriage. She tried to run, to escape with Jeb, but Silas's men had caught them. Jeb had been beaten, warned to stay away, and Clara had been brought here to this cold, dark tomb. A tear trickled down her cheek, leaving a clean streak on her dust-covered skin. Was this the end? Was she doomed to spend her life in this dreary town, married to a man she didn't love, buried alive in a life she didn't choose? Then, a faint tremor ran through the ground. A low rumble echoed from the depths of the mine. At first she thought it was just another settling of the earth, a common occurrence in these old tunnels. But then it came again, stronger this time, vibrating through the soles of her boots. Hope flickered in her chest, a tiny spark in the darkness. Could it be? Could Jeb have found a way? Could he be coming for her? Above ground, silhouetted against the pale moonlight, Jeb worked with a feverish intensity. The cool night air did little to soothe the burning determination that coursed through him. He knelt beside a stack of dynamite, his brow furrowed in concentration as he carefully inserted the blasting caps. His hands, usually steady and sure, trembled slightly with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. He'd spent the last few hours scouring the area, finding a secluded entrance to the old mine, one that Silas and his men had likely forgotten about. It was a risky gamble, but it was the only way. He knew the dangers of dynamite, the unpredictable nature of the explosive force, but he was willing to risk everything for Clara. He glanced up at the mine entrance, a dark maw in the side of the hill. He imagined Clara down there, trapped and afraid, and a fresh wave of anger washed over him. Silas would pay for this. He would pay for hurting Clara, for stealing her freedom, for daring to take her away from him. He carefully connected the wires, checking and rechecking his work. One mistake, one loose connection, and everything could go wrong. He had to be precise, methodical. Clara's life depended on it. He thought of her smile, the way her eyes sparkled when she laughed, the soft touch of her hand in his. Those memories fueled his determination, pushing him forward despite the doubts and the fear. He had to get her out of there. He had to bring her back into the sunlight. He glanced at his watch. Time was running out. The wedding was scheduled for dawn, and he knew Silas wouldn't hesitate to force Clara into the ceremony. He had to act now. He gathered his tools, his movements deliberate and efficient. He double-checked the dynamite, making sure everything was secure. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the cool night air. This was it. There was no turning back. He lit the end of the fuse. It sputtered and hissed, spitting sparks into the darkness. He stepped back, his eyes fixed on the entrance to the mine. He had a few minutes, maybe less, before the explosion. He whispered a prayer to the stars, a silent plea for Clara's safety. Then he waited, his heart pounding in his chest, for the earth to shake and the mountain to roar. He pictured Clara, hoping she felt the tremor, knowing that he was coming. He hoped she knew he would never give up on her. He would tear down the mountain itself to reach her. It had been a chance encounter, a stolen moment under the vast, starlit sky. The town dance, usually a stuffy affair of forced smiles and polite conversation, had been transformed by Clara's presence. Jeb, leaning against a post, watching the dancers with a cynical eye, had been captivated the moment he saw her. She was a whirlwind of laughter and light, her dress the color of a summer sunset. He hadn't meant to approach her, hadn't wanted to break the spell of her beauty, but something drew him in, a magnetic force he couldn't resist. He'd asked her to dance, a simple request that changed everything. Her hand in his felt like a jolt of electricity, sending shivers down his spine. They'd moved together, lost in the music, their eyes locked in a silent conversation. Later, they'd slipped away from the crowd, finding refuge beneath the sprawling branches of an ancient oak tree. They talked for hours, sharing secrets and dreams, their voices hushed with the thrill of discovery. He learned about her longing for a life beyond the dusty confines of the town, her yearning for adventure and freedom. She learned about his solitary existence, his love for the open range, his distrust of rules and restrictions. Their connection was instant, undeniable. They fell in love quickly, fiercely, knowing their relationship was forbidden. Clara's father, a man drowning in debt, had promised her to Silas, a wealthy miner with a cruel streak. It was a business transaction, a way to settle the score. Jeb knew he couldn't let that happen. He couldn't stand by and watch Clara be sold to a man she didn't love. He, pleaded with her father, offered to work off the debt, but the old man was stubborn, blinded by greed and fear. Then came the attempt to elope. Under the cover of darkness, they'd saddled their horses and ridden away, hoping to find a new life beyond the reach of Silas's influence. But they were caught, ambushed by Silas's men. Jeb had fought back, but he was outnumbered, outmatched. He watched helplessly as they dragged Clara away, her eyes filled with terror. Silas had sent a clear message. Stay away or face the consequences. Jeb had been beaten, left for dead on the outskirts of town, but his spirit wasn't broken. His love for Clara was stronger than any threat, any obstacle. He would risk everything to save her, even if it meant facing Silas's wrath, even if it meant defying the entire town. Their love was worth fighting for, worth dying for. And now, as he waited for the explosion, he clung to those memories, the stolen moments of joy and passion that fueled his resolve. He would get her back. He would bring her home. The fuse continued to burn, spitting and hissing like an angry snake. Jeb watched, his muscles tense, his senses heightened. He could feel the vibrations in the ground, a low hum that resonated in his bones. The air crackled with anticipation. Inside the mine, Clara felt the tremors intensifying. The low rumble had grown into a deafening roar. Dust rained down from the ceiling, stinging her eyes. She pressed herself against the wall, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew what was happening. Jeb was here. He was really here. Fear mingled with hope, creating a confusing cocktail of emotions. What if the explosion caused the entire mine to collapse? What if Jeb was hurt? What if they both ended up buried alive? But she couldn't dwell on the what-ifs. She had to trust Jeb. She had to believe in his strength, his courage, his love. He wouldn't let her down. The rumbling grew louder, more violent. The ground shook beneath her feet. She could hear the creaking and groaning of the timbers, the cracking of the rock walls. The mine was coming apart. She closed her eyes, bracing herself for the impact. She whispered Jeb's name, a silent prayer for his safety. She pictured his face, his smile, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he laughed. Those images gave her strength, filling her with a sense of peace. Then the world exploded. A deafening blast ripped through the mine, throwing her against the wall. The air filled with dust and debris. Rocks rained down from the ceiling. The tunnel collapsed around her, burying her in a mountain of rubble. For a moment, everything went black. She couldn't breathe, couldn't see, couldn't hear. She felt a sharp pain in her head, a dull ache in her limbs. She thought she was dying. But then a flicker of light pierced through the darkness. A sliver of hope emerged from the chaos. She coughed, gasping for air. She pushed against the rocks, trying to free herself. She heard a voice, faint but familiar, calling her name. Clara. Clara, can you hear me? It was Jeb. He was alive. She struggled to answer, but her throat was dry, her voice weak. Jeb, I'm here. She heard him moving closer, digging through the rubble. She felt his hand on hers, his strong grip pulling her free. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. She clung to him, burying her face in his chest. They were alive. They were together. The dust settled, revealing a scene of utter devastation. The tunnel was completely collapsed, blocked by a mountain of rocks and debris. But in the midst of the chaos, they had found each other. Their love had survived the explosion. Now they just had to escape. Jeb coughed, spitting out dust and grit. The explosion had rocked him back on his heels, nearly knocking him off his feet. He scrambled forward, his eyes scanning the collapsed entrance to the mine. He had to get to Clara. He didn't hesitate. He started digging, clawing at the rocks and debris with his bare hands. The rocks were sharp and jagged, tearing at his skin, but he didn't feel the pain. His only thought was Clara. He worked frantically, driven by adrenaline and fear. He had no idea how much time they had before the mine collapsed further, burying them both alive. He had to be quick. He shouted Clara's name, his voice hoarse and strained. He listened for a response, any sign that she was still alive. Clara, can you hear me? Clara. He heard a faint cough, a weak cry. Relief washed over him, a wave of pure, unadulterated joy. She was alive. He redoubled his efforts, digging with renewed vigor. He tossed aside rocks and timbers, clearing a path through the rubble. The air was thick with dust, making it hard to breathe, but he pushed on, fueled by his love for Clara. Finally, he broke through. He squeezed through a narrow opening, crawling into the collapsed tunnel. The scene that greeted him was one of utter devastation. The tunnel was completely blocked, filled with rocks and debris. The air was thick with dust, making it hard to see, but in the midst of the chaos he saw her. She was lying on the ground, partially buried under a pile of rocks. Her face was covered in dust, her clothes torn and dirty, but she was alive. He rushed to her side, kneeling beside her. He gently brushed the dust from her face, checking for injuries. Clara, are you okay? Are you hurt? She opened her eyes, her gaze meeting his. A faint smile touched her lips. Jeb, you came. He took her hand, holding it tight. I told you I would. I'll always come for you, Clara. He helped her to sit up, supporting her with his arm. He looked around, assessing the situation. They were trapped. The tunnel was completely blocked and there was no way out, but he wasn't ready to give up. He wouldn't let Clara die in this mine. He would find a way out, no matter the cost. We need to get out of here, Clara. Can you walk? She nodded, her eyes filled with determination. I can try. Together they stood, bracing themselves against the unstable walls of the collapsed tunnel. They took a deep breath, preparing for the long and dangerous journey ahead. Their escape had just begun. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with peril, but they had each other, and that was all that mattered. The tunnel was a maze of fallen rocks and twisted timbers, a testament to the destructive power of the explosion. Every step they took sent tremors through the unstable ground, threatening to bring the entire structure down around them. The air was thick with dust, making it hard to see and even harder to breathe. Stay close, Jeb said, his voice muffled by the dust, and watch your step. He led the way, carefully picking a path through the debris. He used his body to shield Clara from falling rocks, his eyes constantly scanning the walls and ceiling for any signs of weakness. He knew that one wrong move could be fatal. They moved slowly, cautiously, their progress hampered by the unstable terrain. Several times the ground shifted beneath their feet, sending them scrambling for safety. Each near miss only served to heighten their fear, reminding them of the precariousness of their situation. As they ventured deeper into the mine, the darkness intensified. The faint light that had filtered through the collapsed entrance quickly faded, leaving them enveloped in an oppressive blackness. Jeb pulled a small lantern from his pocket, its flickering flame casting eerie shadows on the surrounding walls. The lantern light revealed the true extent of the damage. The tunnel was riddled with cracks and fissures, the walls bulging and straining under the weight of the earth. The timbers that had once supported the structure were now splintered and broken, offering little protection against a further collapse. Despite the danger, they pressed on, driven by a desperate hope for survival. They knew that Silas would be looking for them, that he wouldn't rest until he had them back in his grasp. Their only chance was to escape, to disappear into the vast wilderness and start a new life, far away from his reach. As they rounded a bend in the tunnel, they saw a glimmer of light in the distance. Hope surged through them, a renewed sense of determination. They quickened their pace, their hearts pounding with anticipation. But as they drew closer, they realized that the light wasn't coming from an exit. It was coming from another part of the mine, a section that had somehow remained intact. They hesitated, unsure of what to do. Should they venture into the unknown, risking another collapse, or should they turn back and try to find another way out? Jeb looked at Clara, his eyes searching hers. He saw the fear in her face, but he also saw the determination, the unwavering spirit that had drawn him to her in the first place. "What do you want to do?" he asked, his voice soft. Clara took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. "Let's go," she said, her voice firm. "Let's see where it leads." Together they stepped into the light, ready to face whatever dangers lay ahead. Their escape was far from over, but they were one step closer to freedom, and that was all that mattered. The light led them to a wider passage, seemingly untouched by the explosion. It was eerie, like stepping into a ghost town. Mining carts sat abandoned on the tracks, pickaxes leaned against the walls, and tools lay scattered on the ground as if the miners had simply vanished. "Where do you think everyone went?" Clara whispered, her voice echoing in the silence. "I don't know," Jeb said, his eyes scanning the surroundings. "But I don't like it. Let's keep moving." They continued down the passage, their footsteps echoing in the stillness. The air was thick with a strange, metallic smell, and the silence was broken only by the occasional drip of water. Suddenly, they heard a noise. A faint scratching sound coming from the darkness ahead. They stopped, listening intently. The scratching grew louder, closer. It sounded like something was digging, clawing at the rock. Jeb raised his lantern, casting a beam of light into the darkness. He saw something moving, a dark shape emerging from the shadows. It was a rat, a huge, mangy rat, its eyes gleaming in the lantern light. It scurried across the passage, disappearing into a hole in the wall. Clara gasped, jumping back in fright. "It's just a rat," Jeb said, trying to reassure her. "They're common in mines." But Clara couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The rat had seemed different somehow, more aggressive, more menacing. "Let's go," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't like it here." They hurried down the passage, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the rat. But the feeling of being watched persisted, a prickling sensation on the back of their necks. They rounded another bend in the tunnel, and their hearts leaped with joy. Ahead of them, they saw an opening, a glimmer of daylight filtering through the darkness. "An exit!" Clara exclaimed, her voice filled with hope. They ran towards the light, their legs pumping, their lungs burning. They could almost taste freedom, feel the warmth of the sun on their faces. But as they neared the opening, they heard a voice, a harsh, guttural voice that sent a chill down their spines. "Well, well, well," the voice said, "what do we have here?" They stopped dead in their tracks, their faces paling with fear. Standing in the opening, blocking their path to freedom, was Silas. He was flanked by two of his men, their faces grim and determined. Their escape was over, they were trapped. And this time there was no Jeb to save them, or so Silas thought. "Going somewhere, Clara?" Silas sneered, his eyes glittering with malice. "I can't let you do that, you belong to me." Jeb stepped in front of Clara, shielding her from Silas's menacing gaze. His hand instinctively moved to the knife at his belt, but he knew it was a futile gesture. He was outnumbered, outgunned. "Get behind me, Clara," he said, his voice low and steady. "Jeb, no," Clara protested, her eyes filled with fear. "Just do it," he said, his gaze never wavering from Silas. Silas chuckled, a harsh, grating sound that echoed through the tunnel. "Brave words, Cowboy," he said. "But bravery won't save you this time. You should have stayed away. Now you're going to pay the price." He nodded to his men who stepped forward, their guns drawn. Jeb knew he had to act fast. He couldn't let Silas take Clara back. He couldn't let her be forced into a marriage she didn't want. He lunged forward, catching Silas by surprise. He grabbed him by the collar, pulling him close. "Let her go, Silas," he said, his voice a snarl, "or I'll kill you." Oh, Silas laughed, a cold, mocking sound. "You wouldn't dare," he said. Jeb tightened his grip, his fingers digging into Silas's throat. "Try me," he said. Silas's eyes widened with fear. He realized that Jeb was serious, that he was willing to do anything to protect Clara. All right, he gasped. "Let her go, just let me go." Jeb released him, shoving him back towards his men. "Get out of here, Silas," he said, "and don't ever come near Clara again." Silas glared at him, his face contorted with rage. "This isn't over, Cowboy," he said. "I'll get you for this. You haven't seen the last of me." He turned and stormed away, his men following close behind. Jeb watched them go, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew that Silas would be back, that he would seek revenge, but he didn't care. He had saved Clara, and that was all that mattered. He turned to Clara, his eyes filled with relief. "Are you all right?" he asked. Clara nodded, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Yes," she said, "thanks to you." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. He knew that their escape was far from over, but he also knew that they could face anything, as long as they had each other. They turned and ran, fleeing the mine, leaving Silas and his threats behind. They didn't know what the future held, but they were determined to face it together, hand in hand. Their love was their strength, their guiding light in the darkness. And they would need it because they knew that Silas would not give up easily. The chase had just begun. They burst out of the mine entrance, gasping for breath, their lungs burning with the sweet, clean air. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky with streaks of orange and pink. The world seemed vibrant and alive after the darkness and claustrophobia of the mine. They stumbled away from the entrance, collapsing onto the soft grass. They lay there for a moment, catching their breath, their bodies trembling with exhaustion and relief. Jeb turned to Clara, his eyes searching hers. He saw the fear and exhaustion etched on her face, but he also saw the love and gratitude that shone through. He reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. His touch was tender, reassuring. "Are you really all right?" he asked, his voice soft with concern. Clara nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "I am now," she said. "You saved me, Jeb. You risked everything for me." He smiled, his heart swelling with love. "I would do anything for you, Clara," he said. "You know that." He leaned down, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. The kiss was a promise, a vow of his unwavering devotion. Clara reached up, cupping his face in her hands. She looked at him, her eyes filled with love and admiration. "I love you, Jeb," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "More than anything in the world." He smiled, his eyes shining with happiness. "I love you too, Clara," he said, "more than words can say." He lowered his head, his lips meeting hers in a tender, passionate kiss. The kiss was a release of all the fear and tension, a celebration of their survival, a reaffirmation of their love. They kissed for a long time, lost in each other's arms, oblivious to the world around them. The sun rose higher in the sky, bathing them in its warm, golden light. The birds sang their sweet melodies, celebrating their reunion. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless, their faces flushed with passion. "What are we going to do now?" Clara asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jeb took her hand, holding it tight. "We're going to leave this place," he said, his voice firm. "We're going to start a new life, far away from Silas and his threats. We're going to be free, Clara, together." He stood up, pulling her to her feet. He looked at her, his eyes filled with determination. "Are you ready?" he asked. Clara nodded, her eyes shining with hope. "I'm ready," she said. "Let's go." Hand in hand, they walked away from the mine, leaving their old lives behind. They didn't know what the future held, but they were determined to face it together, with love as their guide. Their adventure had just begun. They walked until they reached Jeb's horse, a sturdy palomino named Dusty, tethered a short distance away. Clara's horse, thankfully, had also not strayed far during the commotion and grazed peacefully nearby. Jeb helped Clara onto her horse, then mounted Dusty. He looked at her, a question in his eyes. "Ready?" he asked. Clara nodded, her chin held high. She was still covered in dust and grime, her clothes torn and her hair a mess, but she had never felt more alive, more free. They turned their horses and rode away, heading west towards the setting sun. The landscape stretched out before them, vast and open, a promise of endless possibilities. They rode in silence for a while, the only sound the rhythmic beat of their horses' hooves. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the plains. The air grew cooler, carrying the scent of sagebrush and pine. As they rode, they talked, sharing their dreams and their fears. They spoke of the future they wanted to build together, a future filled with love, laughter, and adventure. They knew that the road ahead would not be easy, that they would face challenges and obstacles along the way. But they also knew that they could overcome anything as long as they had each other. They decided to head to California, a land of sunshine and opportunity. Jeb had heard stories of ranchers and farmers who had made a fortune there, growing oranges and grapes. He knew that it wouldn't be easy, that they would have to work hard to make a living. But he was willing to do anything to provide for Clara, to give her the life she deserved. Clara, in turn, was excited by the prospect of a new beginning. She had always dreamed of seeing the ocean, of feeling the sand between her toes. She knew that she would miss her family, but she also knew that she couldn't stay in this town, not after everything that had happened. She needed to escape, to start over, to find her own happiness. As the sun began to set, they reached a small stream. They dismounted, letting their horses drink their fill. They sat beside the stream, watching the water ripple and flow. Jeb reached into his saddlebag, pulling out a piece of jerky and a canteen of water. They shared the meager meal, their hunger satisfied by the simple act of being together. As darkness fell, they made camp beneath a cluster of cottonwood trees. Jeb built a small fire, its flames casting a warm glow on their faces. They sat beside the fire, watching the stars twinkle in the night sky. Jeb pulled a blanket from his saddlebag, wrapping it around Clara's shoulders. He put his arm around her, pulling her close. "We'll make it, Clara," he said, his voice soft and reassuring. "I promise you we'll make it." All right. Clara leaned into him, her heart filled with love and gratitude. She knew that they would face challenges ahead, but she also knew that they had the strength and the courage to overcome anything. They had each other, and that was all that mattered. Their future was uncertain, but their love was strong. And as they drifted off to sleep beneath the starlit sky, they knew that they were exactly where they were supposed to be together, on the road to a new beginning. Years passed. The dust of the mine, the echoes of the explosion, faded into a distant memory, replaced by the warmth of the California sun and the laughter of children. Jeb and Clara found their paradise. They didn't strike gold, but they found something far more valuable, a life built on love, trust, and freedom. They settled in a small valley, nestled between rolling hills and lush vineyards. Jeb's skill with horses and Clara's natural green thumb allowed them to start a small ranch. They built a small house, its walls whitewashed and its porch adorned with climbing roses. They planted an orchard, filling it with apple, peach, and pear trees. They tended a garden, growing vegetables and herbs that filled their table with delicious flavors. They had 3 children. Two boys, strong and adventurous like their father, and a girl, beautiful and spirited like her mother. The children grew up running wild in the fields, riding horses, and playing in the creek. They learned the value of hard work, the importance of family, and the power of love. Silas never found them. The vastness of the West swallowed them whole, erasing their tracks and shielding them from his vengeful reach. He remained a distant shadow, a ghost from a past they had successfully escaped. Clara often thought about her father, wondering if he ever regretted his decision to force her into marriage. She hoped that he had found peace, that he had come to realize that money wasn't everything, that love and happiness were the true treasures in life. Jeb, too, had moments of reflection, remembering the risks he had taken, the dangers he had faced. He knew that he had been lucky, that he could have easily lost everything. But he also knew that he would do it all again, without hesitation, for Clara. Their love deepened with each passing year, growing stronger and more resilient. They faced challenges together, supporting each other through good times and bad. They learned to forgive, to compromise, to appreciate the simple things in life. One evening, as the sun began to set, Jeb and Clara sat on their porch, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. Their hair was gray, their faces lined with wrinkles, but their eyes still sparkled with the same love and passion that had ignited in the darkness of the mine. Jeb took Clara's hand, squeezing it gently. "We did it, Clara," he said, his voice filled with contentment. "We made it." Clara smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Yes, we did," she said, "and it was all worth it." The setting sun cast a golden glow over the valley, illuminating their faces and painting the sky with vibrant colors. They sat there in silence, watching the day fade away, their hearts filled with gratitude and love. Their escape from the mine had not only saved their lives, but it had also given them the greatest gift of all, a lifetime of happiness together.